Well, everybody, welcome back to the Coherent Soulcast. I am Ace. I'm here with Laura Connor, who's not in right now, and Dr. LINA. And today, on episode 3, we're going to talk about our traumas, and we're going to talk about transforming our trauma. You know, what is trauma? What is transformation? And what does it look like in our society and civilization? So starting off, we often look at things before we get started. We like for you all to subscribe, please. If you would like to follow us and to watch more content coming from us, if you could hit this like button and help our algorithm, as well as subscribe to any of our social medias. And and then we're just gonna get started. So first thing I wanted to talk about today was how they seem to give us a pill for almost everything. And being that you three are Eastern medicine doctors and don't really ascribe to pharmacology in that way, why do you think and where do you think we went askew from what thousands of years that we were going, herbal medicine and taking care of ourselves, to all of a sudden now we're ascribing things with medications?
I'd love to start that.
Go ahead.
So first, our first talking point was, we had the idea of saying, I was trying to make a Legend of Zelda reference. It's here, take this, the here, take this. It's dangerous to go alone. Here, take this pill. And, we know that that's obviously a reference to the, like you called it, the pharmaceutical approach, which is one way of looking at this, that it's obviously not a solution in that you are you're messing with your serotonergic system, and you're also you're dependent upon taking this pill to sort of numb your experience, which is what it does. I mean, you can look at the side effects and all this, but it's interesting because I want to make it a Taoist alchemical reference as well. And that is that one of the language that's used to describe a sort of attainment of enlightenment, and this is coming from the Taoist alchemical tradition, is what's called the Jindan. The Jindan is the golden elixir, but the other way to translate this word elixir, because the way that some of your famous acupuncture Chinese medicine doctors like Sun Sum Yao, what they would do is they would take these reagents and these chemicals, and they would make an external elixir, and they would compound it down into a metallic little pill that people would take. And so from the alchemical perspective, you have this notion that once you have attained this form of enlightenment, you have attained the golden elixir, the golden pill, you're kind of good from then on. So there's two ways of looking at this. Is that one is that the pharmaceutical approach is that you're here, take this pill, and you're then dependent upon this pill in order to sort of navigate your psyche and your experience of the world in a way that doesn't cause undue suffering. And the other way of looking at this too is that we now have psychedelic psychotherapy taking off, and so there's all this research that you can have one successful psychedelic trip under the right conditions, and then you'll be good. You'll be better for maybe 6 months to a year to 5 years or something. And I see, like Laura and I were talking about this, where we see either expression of this, whether it's obviously like the dependence on a pill is not where we want to go with this thing, but at the same time is thinking that one event or one magical solution, one ayahuasca trip, say, one peak experience to sort of reorient yourself to all this trauma is going to is this what enlightenment is now? Like you've got it, you've attained.
You buy it. You almost buy up enlightenment.
So yeah, I mean, there's both ends of that take this pill. I just wanted to make it a Taoist alchemical reference to kind of invoke the other side of that, which is thinking that you can kind of get there.
Yes.
Thinking that enlightenment is this static thing when it's not.
Because I think you can be just as guilty of this with herbal medicine and Chinese medicine as you can with Western pharmaceutical medicine, as you can with new age kind of methods. Like, I remember when we were talking about this, like I said, yeah, it's like releasing your trauma is one soul retrieval away, which to me, like these things that we're using are very beneficial for a lot of people, but I don't think it's that simple. And I think that it harkens to an attitude of solutionism. The idea that if I just find the right solution, if I just find the right set of circumstances, then this will be 100% resolved and I can move on. And on a spiritual level, I don't think it works that way. I don't think that there's a I think that's our mind kind of believing that we can do something, wash our hands of it, and move on. That's not where healing comes from necessarily.
You got a perspective, Lena?
There's like, I feel like there's no, like they said, like I feel like there's no end solution. I think it's like a process that you do every day. And like one day you might feel so much better because you have shared gratitude with the world, have done beautiful things, and now you feel good internally, physically, spiritually. And then the next day you don't feel that way again, you know? And I think it's a process that people need to be aware of what their body is telling them, because I think that that's where the disconnect is coming from. And that's why you kind of always seek something outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. Like I get so many messages of people saying, what do I take for this? What do I take for that? What do I do this? What do I do that? And I think that you're lacking the self-awareness of where is this problem coming from. And like we talk about this in Chinese medicine all the time, that it's like the root cause is the problem. It's not the symptoms. It's not like you can mask it. And we've been trained, I'm going to say it that way, like even though it sounds harsh, but we've been trained to think that there has to be something for that, like a solution, right? For like there has to be an end to whatever it is that you're feeling, instead of figuring it out why you're feeling that in the first place. And so that's where like the body and the mind is not connected. The body is really smart. We think that the intellect is faster than the body, but it's not. That's the right. Intellect actually the slowest of the whole body. Like we think that we're like, oh yeah, we think all the time, but it's like our body is getting the information, and that's where we're getting all these thoughts from. And that's it's so different from like a Western approach that the mind is everything, and that like the body, like, you know, you can control your body through your mind, which you can. I'm going to give it that, you know, you can do really anything on earth if you put your mind into it. I really believe that. Your mind and your soul and your spirit in devotion, and like not just your mind, but but I think that we think this is it, that we think this is it, but this whole being that is here is like shining red flags everywhere and putting red, you know, and putting little things that are going on, like, oh, this hurt, like what's going on here, like, but we're like, meh, whatever, and we don't even think about it. You talk to most people and they don't even know how many times they pee a day, or if they're peeing really yellow or not, like as I mean, as they know, like as acupuncturists, they don't know nothing of what's happening.
You know, what's part of what, you know, part of what trauma is the trauma programs running constantly in our minds, and then we're distracted by these trauma programs. So we're not thinking about going to the bathroom and watching what we're doing. We're thinking about our life or about problems. We're fretting or doing something like that. I remember when I was going to counseling to get help, and my one doc said that I probably would benefit from mood stabilizers, and it was a friend, and I asked him, I go, because he was taking them as well. He was a veteran, and he said that they helped him function, you know. And I said, would you ever stop taking them? And he said, no, I would never stop taking them. And I said, then that's not an option for me, because what happens if they run out? What happens if something goes wrong and we can't get them? Then all of a sudden I'm not able to control myself. Well, then that's not a solution, in my opinion. That's distractive coping mechanism. And yeah, there's plenty of these things out there that can really help people, and they can help people get to the point of true healing, like Laura was talking about. But what if the whole point of this life was to face our traumas and to overcome them, as to then learn more about ourselves and about this experience and the whole point of being here? And maybe the trauma itself is what's creating the experience that we inevitably live as we get older and mature. And so in y'all's opinion, what is trauma, and how would you define it, not only, as a practitioner, but also from your own experience in your life with the traumas that you've had?
You guys want to go first?
Uh,
I want to hear what you guys have to say about this.
Well, okay, so Lena and I went to the same acupuncture school, and our school is kind of, if you're gonna put it into magical, like Hogwarts hat thing that they do.
The heart school. It was really the heart school.
That whole thing that they do.
Yes, sir.
That thing. We would be what's called a heart school, right? And Laura went to kind of like a fire school, which is very similar to a heart school. And that's because our primary focus at Dragon Rises was on what we call heart shock, and the ability to discreetly diagnose these discrete changes in the pulse and on the body and the presentation that are indicative of what we call heart shock, which is trauma. And if I'm in practice, when I would be feeling a patient's pulse, and I would say, oh, we've got a bit of a rough vibe on the pulse going on, which tells me that there's some heart shock. And of course, the next question is, what the hell are you talking about? What I do is I say that, as we're going through life, the heart, you can think of the kind of the physical heart. That's fine. That's what the pictogram sheen means in Chinese. It actually depicts a physical heart, which is really interesting. And it's not like this. It's like a heart with its chambers. It's fascinating. But the heart means other things in Chinese. And I'm gonna pass that one off to Laura to say more about what the heart is. But I'll say that the heart is going through life, and we come up against some scenario or something that we just can't, we just don't have the space for, that we're just spiritually, psychologically, physically, mentally, whatever, not prepared for. And it shocks us. And what it does, the way I describe it to patients, is your heart's like a bell. And that trauma, that shock to the heart rings that heart bell. But you can go metaphysical, and and like your Sufi poetry, the heart is this infinite space. So what's interesting about that is that it's almost like the moon, but it's like when you can ring that bell, and it keeps ringing. Sometimes, if you have the appropriate, I say appropriate, if you have a sort of internal peace, if you have the ability to then situate this experience, this shock, in the greater story of your life and give it meaning, then that ringing of the heart bell can be dampened, and that ringing cannot, like, it doesn't have to be vibrating your being constantly. But if there isn't the right padding around this heart bell ringing, then that bell can just keep on ringing. And so that's my kind of definition for heart shock. And we feel that on the pulse in the pulse system that Lena and I studied in school, the Shinhammer pulse system, where we feel rough vibrations and smooth vibrations, and actually all kinds of actual perceivable vibrations. It feels like a vibration on the pulse. And that's, really, I think the definition for trauma is simple. I think we all know what trauma is, really. It's when something happens to us, that heart bell is rung. And the question is, how do we navigate that? How do we orient ourselves to this stanza, this chapter, this paragraph that was just written into the story of our life? You can't white that out. You can't face it. Yeah, well, I might quibble with you there, is because I heard you use the word facing earlier, and I think how we do relate to it and the language that we use to relate to it is important. So facing it is you're right, facing it like we face God, like we're facing. We're just facing.
Yeah.
Often I think we're like we want to like take a weapon to it. We want to like hack into.
No, it's mirrors. Everything's mirrors, man. So it's like, yeah. you're just, when I look into the mirror, I see myself. I'm facing myself. But because of the language we've adopted through Western civilization, face off, let's go,
Yeah.
And so when I say facing your trauma, it's just being aware of it, looking at it, acknowledging, accepting it, and then letting it go, which is exactly what we're talking about right now.
I like the energy of a mirror much, anyway, that's my
that. And the reason I say facing the trauma as well, it's because, and what I had said initially is that our traumas, they can become those launching points for our growth. And if we face them instead of what we do a lot of times, which is take a pill, distract, cope, adrenaline junkies. I remember writing about this a couple of years ago, and I posed a question: is there such thing as a healthy distraction? And my definition of that has evolved over time, because I believe there are moments in time that distractions can be useful to allow the vessel and the body, the mind, to kind of dampen down, to slow down, so we can reset and we can see with a clearer eyes and clearer perspective. However, too much of a distraction, then that you're overlooking the issues and the problems. But I want to stay on topic of with this trauma in that regard, and I want to continue to hear what Laura and LINA have to say about what they believe trauma is, coming from their perspectives, and maybe some more of what they experienced in their lives as trauma that maybe we wouldn't normally look at. Because I feel that, again, we all think we know what trauma is, but we don't realize how simplistic a trauma can be. I use the metaphor of someone trips off a curb, and then they mess their knee up. They're 8 years old or something, right? And then every time they see a curb, their knee starts hurting. Or every time they see a curb, they go into fight or flight, but they don't realize it's the curb because they don't even remember the memory. And so that memory gets buried, and it's like in a timeline that they're still living. And so based on your practices and the clients you've worked with and your experiences, what do you think about trauma? What is it to you? And then we're going to move into, using it to transform, which is that's my passion, true passion.
I want to give go ahead. I think in my experience, I want to say something that we haven't said yet, is that depending on the weakness of the body in our medicine is how we handle trauma. So we have to be very caring in the way that people handle those things, because I feel like most people don't realize the things that can affect them and the way that it actually affects them. So for example, I'm going to put an example, like somebody is born a breech baby, right? It's born a breech baby, and now they have like some kind of like constitutional weakness that they're more prone to get traumatized by any little thing that happens around them. So for example, for me, I can say to that person, oh, you're just being weak. And those words to me, I'm like making them stronger, but to them, is that actually a trauma that they're experiencing as I'm telling them this. So I think trauma affects people so differently, and the same things cannot affect two people the same. Like we can go through the same exact thing, and I can handle it a completely different way that the other person. I can be stronger in the way that I cope with it, and I don't even have a rough vibe, as we talked about, right? I don't even have that. And that could be 2 months before that it happened, the same exact thing. And the other person struggles this for years, and they're not able to cope with this at all. So they just put things on top of it. And like the body starts kind of like trying to like put it somewhere, because this is like unresolved thing. So it's like, so we know, like in Chinese medicine, for example, there's the daimai, and a lot of our like emotional things end up falling into the waist and like just getting stagnant there and getting like doesn't move. And we don't know this, but then they have like all these people have like digestive issues or problems with their, the way that they're handling like fats or whatever it is. And it is because this emotional, energetic emotion is somewhere in the body. It has to go somewhere that is weak. So for example, you mentioned the knee, right? You mentioned the knee, about the little kid that hurt the knee. And like now every time that it's cold or it's like something, it hurts them. Well, that trauma kind of latched onto that weakness, to that part of the body. So now it's kind of like the job to move that energy. It's not, so like I understand the facing of it, but it's actually more important to move it in my perspective. Because when you move it, you can actually understand it.
How do you move it?
Well, it depends. For example, like with our medicine, we can move that energetic things, but as well, like in yourself, if you start noticing where it comes up, when it's affecting you, and then start putting things together the way that we build a puzzle, you will start understanding this, and then you're able to kind of like not even face it, but just kind of like let go of that, and it's not affecting you anymore.
Yeah.
I have a very good story that I would like to say. I feel like this one was a really beautiful girl that came to the clinic at the school, and she was having neck phantom pains. She was having like pains here in her neck, but like there was nothing wrong with her. Like she went to the doctor, she did all these things. There was nothing wrong with her, but it would like hurt her. And then we started treating. I didn't say anything. I started treating her for the pain. I started treating her spirit, her Shen, to like help that anxiety and that pain that she's feeling. But I already knew that it was like obviously psychological, that there was something going on there. And then as we started treating, she started kind of like opening up and talking about this stuff that happened to her. And somebody really close to her choked her. And this was something that she really didn't think about, like, you know what I mean, put two together. But as we talked about it and as I treated her, I didn't even have to say it, and she didn't have to face it. It just kind of like went away, like,
there you go.
Which was really interesting because we ended up doing washa on her neck, and like the print of the thumb came up, which is wild because it was like energetically printed on her neck, like
wow.
It's so. And then she was just kind of like I don't feel it anymore. I don't feel any resentment towards that person. Like it was just kind of like, okay.
But wouldn't that be considered facing your trauma? She did all this stuff, right? The body led her on this path through pain, right? Physical pain.
But she didn't actually look for that. What I'm trying to say is that she actually didn't look to face these things. Like she wasn't aware of facing this trauma.
But she still faced it. Anyway, we're arguing semantics like we usually do.
No,
Sorry.
I don't. I think it's an important question. To what extent do you have to be conscious, or do you have to make the unconscious conscious in regards to your traumas in order for them to heal? My answer to that is none. I mean, I believe that you don't have to be conscious of your traumas in order for your traumas to be what we use this word healed, right? That may not even be the right thing. It's just
resolved.
How we orient ourselves, right?
Resolved, yeah. It's like that thing that was affecting the body got resolved, and then there was nothing really left there, and then you can come back to it and it doesn't hurt anymore.
And the only reason, and again, the word facing is like when you knew there was something happened to her, and then she started talking about it, and as soon as she started to talking about it, she faced that trauma and was like, wow, that really did affect me. And all of a sudden it went away. So that's all I'm saying is not like the word facing again is being taken as like this active, like I'm facing you.
No, I think
looking at it, all of a sudden because of the work you did with her, Lina, she was able to look at it and go, that did hurt me and it doesn't anymore. And I'm okay with that. And that acknowledgement is healing.
I think that's the word. I think it's awareness and acknowledgement other than facing, because I think when I think about it, for example, when you guys mentioned about the mirror, I think that when a mirror is just doubling what you're seeing, it's actually not going deeper into it. It's not a mirror that you're going deeper into through like the actual underground. Like, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to feel, what I'm feeling, but basically, like, I feel like it's not really looking at a mirror. It's actually just going in the soil and like planting like things that are on top of it, so the soil can just like kind of like build better. And not to like say that it is not important to acknowledge your traumas, because it's very important to acknowledge and be aware of the things that are affecting you. But I think it's more important to build up a better foundation for yourself instead of getting stuck on fixing yourself, because I think that's what happens with our our traumas, kind of like it starts unbinding, right? Things start unbinding. So this thing that happened, oh, but this thing that happened, and now you're stuck in this unbinding that is forever.
I agree with for some people, but for people with more severe traumas, I feel like you have to uproot your old foundation that's rotted and broken and charred, and you have to then build a bigger foundation for a bigger building that you're going to build afterwards. And I'm only saying that because this is my story, which we're going into stories, right? This is my story, was that I tried to renovate, and I kept building houses of cards, and it wasn't until I dug up my foundation and relaid it and built my skyscraper from this. I had this little mud hut, right? What I thought was my mansion. And now I'm building this skyscraper because I laid a new foundation. And I feel that some people don't have to look at their trauma and can enlighten through the life of just kind of living a better life and making better choices and going and doing them. But for some people that, like, say me, I had to really face there is the word again. I had to face the stuff that I refused to face because I was scared to, and it was uncomfortable. And all my body wanted, and all this vessel experience wanted, was my attention. But because I had so much in there that I was refusing to look at, it was poisoning. I was decaying and dying, physically dying. And so it's like I just have a very different outlook on that facing your trauma thing. But I do see your perspective, and I do agree, because there are people who only have maybe one thing that's holding them completely back. And all of a sudden, like you said, this girl, all of a sudden, she's like, she couldn't get into a good relationship because her throat hurt all the time, or she couldn't sing because her throat hurt all the time, or she couldn't do this. All of a sudden she comes to you and she lets it go. And now she can just go live and be who she really is. She doesn't really have to face too much. She just was like, oh, that was what was holding me back. But there's other people who have just what I call accumulative trauma. Like Laura was saying, it's just stacking to where you don't even know what is up from down, left and from right. And so I want to hear Connor's perspective real quick on how does one heal trauma without having to really know that they have it? Like, how do you let that go?
Okay. So first of all, I think Lina's point is not that, and I may be wrong, but the way that I took Lina's story, and I've seen this both in myself and in other people, is not that she looked at the trauma and said, wow. It's simply that she just was. She just reoriented herself to her life. There's no conscious cognitive, because I've said this about therapy before, that like often we go to therapy and we're given a story that is just fancier wrapping for the story, the former story that we had, right? And so my question to you, when you say that you dig up your foundation, is, and then I'm going to hand it over to Laura. This is a rhetorical question, because I'm actually coming to realize how very opinionated I am about this, and that is that I don't even personally, even though I'm an acupuncturist, I feel like a lot of our stories in Chinese medicine can actually be rooted in a very allopathic kind of, am I adding or am I subtracting? There's deficiencies and all those kinds of things. I think that the frailest physical body can be home to some of the most absolute profound spirits. And my question is, like, I like that when you said that you had to uproot your old foundation and then build a new one. I would offer, and I don't know how it was for you, but you say the word build, you have to build a new foundation. The way that it's most harmoniously done in my perspective is that you're there and you simply blink your eyes, and before you is the most magnificent crystal palace you could have ever possibly dreamed of, and this is your new foundation. I don't have to go, I don't have to chop wood and carry water, and I don't have to tie this foundation together, and I don't have to lay this concrete and all this kind of stuff. I blink my eyes and there it is. And it was actually in front of me all along.
Exactly. 1,000%.
Cool. Yeah. And yeah, that doesn't fit in with the story of separation that we're accustomed to.
Mm-mm.
of hard work and of the hard work and the blood, sweat, and tears of healing trauma. And because so much of that is rooted in separation, you know?
And that is exactly it. Because real quick, Laura, before you take it, I just wanted to throw this in there, is because you're absolutely right in that point, is because what I was speaking about is healing my trauma without really leaning into complete spirit. Mm-hmm. I healed my trauma, which took me very long time, because it took me 4 or 5 years before I can release it to spirit and do exactly what Connor's saying, which is surrender.
Because you thought you were the one doing it all. Because you thought you were the one.
I had to find some solution, which brings us back to the very initial point you were talking about. I had to find some solution that would tell me that I can then be whole, that I can be holy, that I can have love, that I can be loved, that I can be in love. I had to heal this. Just like what I used to tell myself about relationships. I can't be in a relationship until I make this much money. I can't be in a relationship until I have my own house. I can't, there's all these stipulations I'm putting on my life, which brings us back to the original episodes we talked about. But Laura, what do you have to say about trauma and the stories we
for that, right?
Yeah,
it does.
It's okay.
I would say my education was it was a little different, but not by much, in all honesty. There's this idea that all disease comes from the heart. And so it's very similar to that. And for me, the heart initially gets these impacts, and then depending on the constitution of your body and your other organs is how we kind of cope with trauma. But I'm going to rewind a little bit here, because listening to you guys talk about this, I had this moment, and Connor knows I've been bursting over here going like, when can I talk, you guys?
Want to finally.
Over here right now. I'm like hearing us talk like our traumas, the trauma that we experience. And I do not think that's not what's going on here. It's like trauma is not a noun in terms of how we treat people. I think that if I had to describe trauma and define it in terms of like working with a client, it would be that trauma is actually just the degree and the severity at which you react to a normal life event. Anything that we consider traumatizing is just life.
Exactly.
It's just life. And I feel like I
Trigger warning.
I mean, I have this perspective, one, because I work in so much home birth. Like, for goodness sakes, these women give birth to babies, the most normal possible thing that we could do in our lives. And lots of people would look at that externally and say that is the most traumatizing event someone could put themselves, and they put themselves through it, guys. They put them like, and they do fine, right? Okay. So it's life. The most horrible things that happen to us is life.
Yeah.
And this is perfect, because this goes right in, segues right into victimhood as an initiation. We oftentimes hear and so negatively about victimhood, don't be a victim, and they're just playing the victim again, which maybe in those cases they are. But victimhood itself isn't wrong. You're allowed to sit with yourself and feel how you feel about life and the shit that's thrown at you. So Laura, what do you mean by victimhood as an initiation, and when does it become too much? When do we sit in it too long and then it becomes an issue?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the same way when we talk about how trauma can be an issue. I think that the archetype of victim can sit for too long and kind of echo off the walls and ping pong off and cause all this crazy kind of mind things that result in even more chaos, interior chaos, basically. I think that victimhood is an incredibly powerful state for a lot of people when it comes to processing life. I think we willingly choose to initiate ourselves in that state, and we have to willingly choose to leave it. And one of the things that I feel happens, and this is just from my experiences of talking to people, is that we start to look to external processes to bring us out of victimhood. If I could only get justice. And I would just say, you know, most people who have been in abusive situations, they're never going to get the justice that they want that allows them to feel like they could get out of that victimhood role. And so
it's overrated.
It's overrated. Yes, it's overrated. And I think that most people who have been in that process in their life, they have a moment where they go, wow, I'm never going to get justice. And they realize that it's actually up to their own internal process to get out of that state of victimhood. Otherwise, they'll find themselves in it over and over and over again. And just on a more, like, you know, just from my experience of births, once again, like, I think from like someone who's often external to the internal process of the mother, there's some births I've been to where they're amazing as far as I'm concerned. You know, I've been to some births that are a little scary. And I've been to other ones that felt like a cakewalk. And then you talk to the mom 48 hours later. And for some of them, it's the most traumatic experience they've ever had in their entire life.
The cakewalk, you mean? The relative cakewalk.
The cakewalk.
Not to knock anybody's.
You know, we call them in the business, we call them butter births.
But Laura, do you think that the severity of the traumas the mom has faced in the past determines the severity that they look at the traumas of giving birth?
Absolutely. But I think that's related to the constitutional thing that we think about in Chinese medicine, that there's already these events that are reverberating, that are kind of like they're doing this thing constantly inside our bodies. Like, that's why so often in the work that I do, we say, hey, process your trauma before you go into labor, because you don't want to do it while you're in labor, you know, because it will come up. It will come out up with
it's almost a near-death experience for the mom, if not an actual death. Like, there's a death and birth at the same time. Your old self is dying, the old you of who you were, and you're becoming this mom, and in literally a split second, you're a mom now. Like you're a mom, and you're no longer this young girl who was single and by herself and doing this whole thing. No, now you have this entirely new role and new existence to play. And it's amazing that the body itself is flushed with specific hormones and chemicals to make sure that you have that transition. And so, Lina, did you want to add anything to the victimhood segue, or did you want to go right into transformation? Because I have a little quirk I want to throw in there and then ask.
No, I think she covered it. The only thing that I do want to add to it is that I feel like you can feel like a victim, and you can be on that. But I also feel like you can't collide another star, meaning that like you can't put this pressure on other people to feel what you're feeling.
Right.
So I think that's a very important thing to talk, because I feel like I can feel the way I feel about something that happened to me, but if I'm exposing it to somebody that I'm really close to, and I'm constantly complaining and venting to it because I feel this way and I'm feeling it and I'm going through it, then I'm actually imposing my energy on somebody else, and I'm imposing my trauma to somebody else as well, because they're feeling this kind of like, oh damn, like this anxiety and this feeling inside of them. Like if I tell you something really traumatic, I'm sharing that energetically. You're lowering your energetically field just to let me in to complain about what I feel. So me and my best friend do this thing. Me and her talk almost every single day. She's a single mother, and we try to like keep conversation always going. But what we do is when she wants to vent, she calls me and she's like, can I vent? And I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, do you want to vent or do you want my opinion? That's the second question. And then she goes, I just want to vent. And I'm like, okay. And I just let her vent, or I'm not letting her in. Because when I'm giving my opinion, I'm letting her in into feeling. I'm like, so what would I do in this moment?
I like that. Yes.
Like if I'm giving feedback to you about your problem, I'm
You're
actually
connecting.
involved in your problem, period. Like it doesn't matter where, like if I didn't experience that, if I'm giving you my opinion, is I'm giving you my energy to that trauma or to that experience that you're having. So if they're venting, I'm just kind of letting it slip through me. I'm not gonna even think about what to say to them or to say to her
You're
when
just
she's
soundboarding.
yes, I'm just kind of letting her, maybe she just feels really alone and wants somebody to listen to her, you know, and that's enough. And I think that's what we need in relationships and friendships and everything, is this actually space of boundaries for this. Because just because you went through a lot of stuff doesn't mean that you can dump it on somebody else.
And then
And
think
like,
about how many times people become a victim because somebody who's a victim put all their shit on them, and they go and victim to somebody else. And the victim, I call it free radicals, stealing electrons from everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so that was a beautiful, it was a beautiful way to, so we talked about victimhood from this side. We talked about victimhood from that side, which segues into transformation. The whole point of being a victim for a little bit of time is to get us moving in a direction to then transform. So what is transformation? And before we get into that, I want to refer to something that Connor was talking about. Laura was talking about, where Connor said in the first podcast we did together, he said last year, he said to me, forgiveness is a word in the English language that is this force in the universe that's unlike anything in the world. And it's like, you know, that person trying to get justice, for some reason, they just aren't going to get the justice they're looking for. And it's not until they learn to forgive that then they can transform their trauma. And so I feel that foundation to transforming our trauma is to forgive, which takes awareness. So what do you all believe in that? And you know, rap about that for a little bit.
Amen.
I can say something about this. This is, I think, yes, very important part of transforming these things. But I also feel, wait, now I just forgot my train of thought. Oh my God, it just slipped what I was going to say. Oh, wait. Okay, got it. Sorry.
We should have sound effects.
Catched it before I left. I think before you need to realize that there's a guilt and shame before forgiveness. And that the guilt and shame, whatever you went through, for example, if it's very hardcore stuff, really terrible stuff that we would say like, oh my God, and you have some sort of shame and guilt from it, you can't pass that. You can't move from that, because this guilt and shame are so heavy that they're densing you down. They're not allowing you to see things from a different set of eyes. They're only letting you see life through a guilt and a shame, like sunglasses. I don't know how to put it, but like really, like you're seeing life as you're guilty, as you're shameful, and you don't even realize it, because you're this trauma and this experience that you're carrying it with you as a guilt or shame, no matter what trauma it is. So I think before you forgive or try to forgive yourself, you have to realize that there's this guilt and shame, like, right? So you have to realize that there's this kind of thing that you're feeling about yourself, because it's more important what you're feeling about yourself than anything other outside. And when we're kind of putting it out to the ether of like, I want justice, I want this, you're not actually doing anything for yourself. You're doing something for the outside part of it, the material world, the finite stuff, the things that are limited in life, you know, not the infinite. The infinite is when you learn that there's some guilt and shame that you have to kind of work through and understand why you feel that way, and that it's okay to feel that way as well.
Do you think that woman had guilt and shame imposed on her body by that man choking her, or that person? I don't know if it was a man or a woman. So say they got in an argument and it got so severe that the person chokes this woman and literally imprints that emotional, like, you aren't good enough for me and blah. And then all of a sudden grabs her. It almost was like the body was like imprinted with a physical guilt and shame of that trauma. Do you think that's a potential for I think it comes from both, and it depends on how you handle it. Again,
the way that you're handling that stressor.
Absolutely.
And that I think is a stressor. And that's kind of like, okay, so how are you handling it? And how are you feeling about this? Most likely, yes, it was affecting her to a point where she was feeling a little shameful to even talk about it, because we had a whole month and a half like where we saw each other constantly, and it didn't even come up, even though that was the thing that we were treating. So I think there is, but I think building that body and nourishing her body through like all these things that we do, and it kind of allowed her to even surface that.
I believe that.
Had enough water to bring that to the surface, instead of like it being an empty cup that you can't even reach. Because it's like, that's what you're trying to do when you're you go through a trauma. You kind of try to reach at that trauma, but instead, like, we're kind of like put it away somewhere. We're like, instead of filling up your cup so you can actually face it with energy enough to face it, because you can face it and then get stuck on this because you don't have enough energetic energy or like
drowning in an empty cup,
or
drowning in an empty cup paradox.
Well, her use of the word water was
perfect,
intentional. There's a reference to the kidney in Chinese medicine
of the essence.
So what do you two believe transforming trauma to be? I'm interested to hear Connor's perspective, because again, at first I'm very opinionated about this, but over the last 3 or 4 months that we've been working together, they've broken me down many times with my very hard-headedness and my hard line perspectives. But I do believe now that it's possible just to be like, I'm done with trauma. I don't want it anymore. I'm done. I'm good. I resolved myself. We're good. But I want to hear how you can get to the point to be there, because that is a slap in the face to somebody who right now is like basically can't get out of bed because of their trauma. So that's all I'm saying. When it's like, when you say that, it's just like, what happens inside my body is like everything I did, everything the human 3D element did to heal is negated because it was nothing, you know what I mean? So that's how it can be taken. So I want to hear kind of like, how did you get to this realization? And then how did you adopt it?
There's a spiritual answer to every problem.
Thank you. Yes.
And there is an infinitely deep well of spiritual strength inside of you. And so it's a matter of, rather than orienting yourself to your story as if you have to engage in all this hard work to get from point A to point B, it's a matter of turning around and blinking your eyes and realizing that there's this formerly invisible crystal palace. That's your new foundation. And it was always there.
I think what you're trying to say is like, what steps do you need to take in order to be able to realize that this is something that you can do as a human being? And I think it comes from like you being present in the moment and taking little steps to whatever it is that you're doing. That's the way that you understand that there's not a lot to do except be present.
That's right.
It's like,
no,
when we're feeling their traumas, we're living in the past. We're living in that trauma that is in the past. We're not living in the present. Because I say this a lot. Are you experiencing that right now? And the answer, no, obviously not. You're like, you're talking about it in the past. So then I'm like, okay, then why don't you look around and see that there's actually nothing right now that can hurt you? And that comes from like you understanding that you are safe and that whatever happened, but you're in the present and you're safe. And that's where you come to a realization that everything is meant to be like right now, because all your work was meant to happen for this moment to happen in a way. You didn't come to this realization easily. We didn't either. And this was a like little steps that you take for you to choose yourself in the moment of eternal presence.
So basically what I just got downloaded with as you were saying that is like, we always hear these words, the triggers, I got triggered and I'm triggered and this is triggered. It's almost like we're faced with situations that remind us of the things that actually happened to us so that we can now face them in the present moment. And so how does one look at their triggers differently in order to use them to transform? because that's kind of like you're saying, Lena, is a person who's freaking out about what was happening back then in the now moment is still living back then. They're living in the past. They're energetically tied to that past moment. And I believe that through acknowledging that, like you said, you got them to now you got them back to the present, and they're like, whoa, that's not real. And they're like, okay, so how do we let that go? How do we let that energetic tie to that past memory go once we know it's there? And I feel that for me is the work. If there's any work, is just acknowledging that, hey, this happened to me. I'm reacting to something that happened to me then as if it's happening to me now. It's not real. I'm safe. How do I let it go?
It's a negative feedback system, I think. And it I'm sorry, go.
Well, yeah. So first and foremost, patience with yourself. I mean, this is, like we talked about, this is a process that we're talking about. It's not something that, and if your orientation to your own story is one of victimhood, continual victimhood, rather than saying, yeah, that happened to me. Right, babe? Rather than saying, this is my life, I mean, when I talk about, someone was laughing at this the other day, when I talk about, I think it was you, Lena, when we were talking about, me running into a tree, at 60 miles per hour and breaking 5 bones in my face and having to have it stitched together with titanium again, held together. That's one of the best things that ever happened to me. My mom dying showed me completely new realities, and made things real that I'd never imagined. And so, and I can't, it's not fair to us to have this expectation that others should be able to somehow step into a relation of their own trauma as if it's just, ain't no thing but a chicken wing. But in reality, if we have that spiritual foundation, that crystal palace, this whatever, it is possible to, you have to be patient with yourself. See, because the thing is, you're asking the question, how do we do it? It doesn't sound very pretty, but the answer is you just do.
Yes.
And
it's your surrender to the experience that happens. But my point is that if what we're at, you just do, but the question, how do I, is an inhibition to just doing it. Seek and you will find. Well, seek and you will find, but I would consult the Tao Te Ching as well. We're seeking after anything is, it runs the wheels off their spokes and stuff, so right.
I think this is part of what I struggle with, especially with the forgiveness conversation, because we can talk about how important forgiveness is, self-forgiveness and forgiveness of people around us, but I never tell clients that is a step to healing or transformation.
Forgiveness.
That it happens on its own. I never tell them forgiveness is part of this. One, that's a surefire way to piss off the person I'm working with.
Lose a client.
Without a doubt. And I would say the same for my own personal kind of trauma. If someone had said that to me, and the own intense pressure I put on myself to do that, to forgive myself, to forgive the other people around me, because that was the right spiritual thing to do. That if I didn't do that, that was somehow spiritually bypassing the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
When we get so focused on the steps that we need to do to get to this point of transformation, that we forget that actually there's really nothing to do, that it's already here. And that is definitely the hardest thing to hear. And I would say
the undoing.
It is the undoing, it's unwork. It's unwork.
It really is. It's learning how to flow instead of.
And I think that's so hard to hear, but speaking as someone who has struggled with very intense mental health stuff, all I can say to the people who are struggling with that right now is just hold on. When we say having patience, just hold on. And so the number one thing that I tell myself and I tell the people I'm working with is spend time in your heart, because when I say all disease comes from the heart, I really mean that. And when our heart is small and diseased and not there, it feels small. When we're struggling emotionally, when we're feeling traumatized, it feels like there's something inside our hearts trying to crawl out. It feels like it's this small thing. But the reality is, and this is very much a Sufi thing that came from my practice of Sufi practices, the heart is infinite. If we just sit and spend time in the heart and really experience it for how infinite it is and how big it is, once it's big, once it's infinite, once we have divine love in there and our own unconditional love for ourselves, these traumas and these things we struggle with feel tiny in comparison. They're very, very finite. And so for me, I tell patients, I tell myself, forgiveness, letting it go, this is not the thing to be concerned about right now. The thing to be concerned about is how small you're making your heart. Like I go, can we just sit inside your body and really recognize how infinite you are, because you really are.
And what I realized with my trauma was it kept me from loving and letting love in. And that was where all of my suffering and decay came from. And it was like, so last question.
I want to hold on. I want to offer that this is, we're right at time, but I want to offer to this is the spiritual function of Christ. So when we're talking about the role of forgiveness and things like that, this is why people become born again Christians. Is because that they feel that there's a metaphysical force that is holding this whole universe together, which loves them unconditionally, infinitely, and has enough love to go around for the victim and the perpetrator, and that there's that forgiveness is actually built into it, and all you have to do is take it in, which is sort of first and foremost an act of self-forgiveness. It's an act of from your self-forgiveness comes this sort of overflowing of like a kind of spiritually flavored forgiveness. It's not just this cognitive thing. So Laura's right when she says that. And so,
100%, you got to feel it. Like trying to forgive when you don't feel it in your heart, it's just words. It's just nothing. And so what I had this to wrap us up, it's exactly at time. So we're gonna wrap us up real quick. Is my last question was how to become who we are when we don't yet know where to start. And that is to spend time in your heart and flirt with the idea that this Christ consciousness, Christ love, whatever you want to talk about, something spiritual that's bigger than you, yet still you, full of love, is a path back to you. And there is no back to you because you're always you. It's just removing all these layers of illusion that muddies this ability to see ourselves. And so today that was a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate Connor, Laura, and Lina for spending the time with me. If you all want to
we appreciate you too.
If you all want to leave any last words or anything, if you want to throw your plugs in there before I take us off.
I think it's a lot less work when you surrender to divine will, and what happens, it's a lot less work than when you try to do it yourself.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the only other thing that I would add is I do think it's important to recognize that everyone tells the story of their life differently over the years. And so really what's important is how you're telling your story now, and you can shift that in any moment, and you can shift that in 2 seconds if you choose to.
And I want to finish with, there comes a time in your healing journey where you may start looking for things that are not actually there anymore. You become so used to trying to heal that you don't realize that you may actually already be healed, and that there may just be programs or mindsets that you need to work on. And so I just say, for all those who have been on this journey for a long time, like I have, and like many of us here have, sometimes we can chase things that aren't there because that's all we know how to do now. But, you can choose, like Connor said, you can choose now in this now moment to be healed and believe it. And it will be true because you are. And so with that, thank you so much for spending another evening with us on the Coherent Soulcast, where we're talking about transforming our trauma. Oh,
we're going to have a website up soon. Coherentsoulcast.com is coming soon. Check us out on Telegram. We got a YouTube channel, got a Rumble channel. There's a prayer group, which will also be linked on the website. Lina's rocking the TikTok. She's got her own TikTok and Instagram. Right, Lina?
Here I am, TikToking it away.
learning new software, becoming a video
Learning
producer.
new software, yeah, learning a bunch of stuff. It's so fun. I love my life right now. It's kind of just learning a bunch of random things
you never thought you would.
Yeah, it's really fun, and just live life and enjoy, guys. Enjoy life.
Amen.
So when's our next live?
Very good. May 5th.
Next week.
Oh, sorry, April 14th. And we'll I'm on the show, I promise. And April 14th, we're going to be talking about reparenting ourselves. And
on my mother's birthday. How funny.
Ay, Dios. And then we're going to have Christine Pedersen, who's a mindful parenting coach. She's fantastic. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay. And with that, we're so grateful to spend this hour with you. We're so grateful to talk about trauma and transformation. Again, this is the Coherent Soulcast. I'm Ace. You got Connor, Laura, Lina, Dr. Lina. But thank you so much for spending time with us. We love you all very much. And we'll see you again next week. So
much
take
love.
care and goodbye.
Peace out.
Goodbye.